Hi everyone, it's Angie here, and I'm doing the tutorial for the pattern for the wrap bag first because that sounded like I said rat bag, but I didn't. I definitely said wrap bag. I'm doing the pattern for the wrap bag first because it seemed to be the most popular, and if you don't remember what that was, it's this one right here that I made for the Antique Anatomy Tarot, which is a standard size tarot deck. So the measurements I give you today are going to be compatible with all standard size tarot decks. So if you need to make a wrap for something that's bigger or smaller, you're going to have to adjust the measurements. But yeah, this thing right here. All right, so let me address a few things before we get started very quickly. You don't have to have a sewing machine to sew these bags. You can do this by hand very easily, especially this one. It's a super easy pattern. If you're not familiar with hand sewing, just go on YouTube and you'll want to look up one of two stitches. The first stitch is called a running stitch, and that's going to be the fastest and easiest stitch. The only downside is it's not as sturdy as other stitches. Your bag's not going to fall apart if you use it. It just won't be as sturdy. So if you really want something that's going to stand up, then I would suggest the back stitch. Back stitch takes probably twice as long as a running stitch, but it is much sturdier. So if you're not familiar with either of those and you want to hand sew it, go ahead and go onto YouTube and yeah, look up both of those stitches and see which one works best for you. You only need a needle and thread to get started, and obviously your fabric. Okay, so now that I mentioned that, let's talk about materials just very quickly because I really don't want this to turn into a really long thing and get boring. So fabric. Especially if you are new to sewing, I highly recommend sticking with a basic cotton fabric. Something that's not slippery, something that doesn't have any stretch to it whatsoever. It's going to be the easiest thing to work with. If you're not new to sewing and you know how to work with difficult fabrics, obviously you can use whatever you want, but I highly recommend just plain cotton fabric without any sort of stretch in it whatsoever. You can get that at pretty much any craft store. Walmart even carries fabric. And if you don't want to spend any money, you almost certainly have something laying around your house that you can use, whether it's, you know, old jeans or a button-down shirt, just whatever you have on hand is going to work. The second thing about the fabric, and this isn't exactly fabric, but it's something we're going to use for this, it's the lace that you see here, the one that we use for the tie. You can use pretty much anything. You can use cloth, you can use ribbon, whatever you like. Again, I recommend something without stretch because this is going to be used to, you know, to tie it up. And the more stretch it has, the more warped and bent out of shape it's going to get. So this isn't just regular lace that I've used here. This is lace hem tape. And the reason why I like that is because most laces and lace ribbons have some sort of stretch to them. And lace hem tape doesn't really have any stretch to it. And it's super cheap. It's like $2 for a full card of this. And this is pretty much all gone right now. So I do recommend that, or something like it, just something that doesn't have stretch to it. You can get ribbon, again, at any craft supply store. Walmart has it. You can make it out of whatever you've got handy. So yeah, so let's see. I discussed the fabric and the measurements. I briefly touched on that. I said I was going to, the measurements for this were going to fit a standard size tarot deck. So what that measurement's going to be is going to be 15 inches in length by 8 inches in width. And that includes a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you like a larger seam allowance, obviously you'll have to add If you don't know what a seam allowance is, you can look it up online to get a bit of a better idea. But basically, here's what it is. A seam allowance it's the area outside of where you're going to make your stitch. So I'm going to make my stitch about right here, which means that's about a 1/4 inch seam allowance, if that makes sense. If you find that you're having trouble working within such a small seam allowance, you can increase it, just like I said before, but you have to add that to your measurements. If you wanted to have a 1/2 inch seam allowance instead of a 1/4 inch seam allowance, you would have to make your measurements, oh God, now I have to math. What? 15.5 by 8.5, I believe, would give you an extra 1/4 inch to make it, yeah, a 1/2 inch seam allowance. If I'm wrong, correct me below because I can't math. Okay, so I've already pre-cut this fabric just to make this go quickly. And if you'll see here, I've got the right sides together, and that's important because we're going to sew this up with the right sides together. If you're familiar with sewing, you already know what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. If you're not, you probably have no idea why I'm sewing it wrong side out. It probably seems counterintuitive, but it'll make sense in a minute. Okay, and right here, why the hell did I just grab the pen cap? I can't brain today. Okay, so I still got it in my hand, whatever. All right, you'll see right here I made 2 markings, 2 little lines right here. I usually don't and just eyeball it, but I figured for what we were doing here, it would probably be best if I, demonstrated it visually. So there's these 2 little lines right here, and basically all of this space in between these 2 lines, we're not gonna sew inside of. It's really important because this is gonna be our turning hole, as well as the area where we put our lace ribbon. So here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew this up. I'm going to pause and sew it and then come back and show you what I've done and where we're going to go next. So just really quickly, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start right here and I'm going to sew all the way around until I get right back to here, and then I'm going to stop here. So again, this space is completely open. Okay, so I'm going to pause and I'm going to come back.